Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something I know a lot of you are interested in, especially if you're prepping for those UPSC exams. We're tackling the question of just how powerful is China's Navy really? I mean, you've probably seen the headlines. China's got the biggest Navy by ship count, clocking in at over 370 vessels. That's got to be a sign of global dominance, right?
Well, not so fast. It's easy to get caught up in the sheer numbers. But when it comes to naval power, it's not just about how many ships you have, it's about combat experience, reliable technology, and the ability to operate far from your own shores, what we call blue water capability. And in those areas, China's Navy has some pretty significant weaknesses.
Okay, so let's break this down. Why is everyone making such a fuss about China's Navy if size isn't everything?
Well, the rapid growth of the People's Liberation Army Navy, or plan, is certainly eye-catching. But it's important to remember that a Navy's true strength lies in its ability to operate effectively in a real conflict. And the plan simply doesn't have the kind of combat experience that other major navies have.
You're saying they haven't really been tested in battle.
Their last significant naval engagement was the Sino-Vietnamese War back in 1979. Since then, it's mostly been peacetime drills and symbolic displays of force. Compare that to navies like the U.S.-India or Australia, which have been actively involved in conflicts, humanitarian missions, and joint exercises for decades. They've learned to operate under pressure, adapt to unexpected situations, and coordinate complex operations in real-world scenarios.
So even though China has all these ships, they might not actually know how to use them effectively in a real fight. That's a pretty significant vulnerability.
Absolutely. It raises serious questions about their strategic thinking, their ability to adapt in a crisis, and their overall combat readiness. We saw hints of this in the joint drills they conducted with Russia in 2021. There were reports of synchronization issues, difficulties coordinating maneuvers, and a general lack of seamless integration. It suggests that the plan might struggle to keep up with more seasoned navies, even in controlled environments.
That's surprising, especially since these joint exercises are supposed to showcase their capabilities. So what about their aircraft carrier program? Those are pretty impressive, at least from the pictures I've seen. Are they not a sign of real power projection?
China's been investing heavily in aircraft carriers, seeing them as a symbol of their growing naval might. They currently have two operational carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong, and are working on a third. But the reality is, these carriers have significant limitations.
What kind of limitations are we talking about?
Well, for starters, their design is based on an old Soviet model that's less capable than modern U.S. carriers. They're also smaller, carrying fewer aircraft, and lack the sophisticated launch and recovery systems that allow U.S. carriers to operate a wider range of aircraft, including heavier, more advanced jets.
So it's like they've got the basic idea of a carrier, but they're not quite there yet in terms of functionality and power?
Precisely. And then there's the issue of operational readiness. U.S. carrier strike groups are constantly deployed around the world, conducting operations and honing their skills. They're like well-oiled machines, capable of projecting power and responding to crises on a global scale. China's carrier groups, on the other hand, are still relatively inexperienced. They have limited range and endurance. Their logistical support systems are still developing, and they haven't been put through the rigorous testing and training that U.S. carrier groups undergo.
Interesting. So even their most impressive assets, these aircraft carriers, seem to be more about symbolism than actual combat capability. Is this a pattern we're seeing across the board with their technology?
There's definitely a gap between the hype surrounding China's naval technology and the reality on the ground. They've made some advances, but they've also had some very public setbacks that raise serious doubts about their technological prowess.
What kind of setbacks? Give me some examples.
Well, a pretty major one happened just last year in 2024. A brand new nuclear submarine, the Type 096, sank during its construction at the Wuhan shipyard.
Wow. A nuclear submarine sinking before it even hits the water. That's got to be a huge embarrassment and a major setback for their program. What does something like that say about the state of their shipbuilding and technology?
It points to potential problems with design, construction, and quality control. For a nuclear submarine to sink during its construction phase suggests there might be deeper systemic issues within their shipbuilding industry.
That's a pretty worrying sign, especially if they're aiming to challenge established naval powers.
And it's not just submarines. Let's talk about their much-touted carrier killer missile, the DF-21D. It was supposed to be a game changer, capable of taking out U.S. aircraft carriers from a distance.
Oh yeah, The Guam Express, right? I remember all the talk about how this missile was going to shift the balance of power in the Pacific.
Exactly. But the hype surrounding the DF-21D has yet to be proven in a real combat scenario. Experts have questioned its accuracy, its ability to penetrate advanced missile defense systems, and its overall effectiveness against a moving target like an aircraft carrier.
So once again, we're seeing this gap between what's being advertised and what's actually been demonstrated. What else is holding China's Navy back from achieving true blue water capability?
Well, their efforts to export their ships to other countries haven't exactly gone as smoothly as they might have hoped.
They're trying to sell their warships to other nations. I would think that's a risky move if they're still working out the kinks in their own technology.
It's a key part of their strategy to expand their influence and project power globally. But these exports have often backfired, creating more problems than solutions and raising questions about the quality and reliability of Chinese-made warships.
So they're not exactly winning over customers with their products?
Yeah.
Give me an example.
Take Bangladesh, for instance. They purchased 2 Ming-class submarines from China back in 2017. These were advertised as modern and capable, but they turned out to be outdated and plagued with problems, costing Bangladesh a fortune in upkeep and repairs.
Ouch. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement for Chinese naval technology.
Mm.
Are there other examples of these exports causing problems?
Sri Lanka received a P-625 frigate as a gift from China in 2019, and it's been nothing but a headache for them. Constant mechanical failures, delays, and questions about its overall quality have made it more of a liability than an asset.
It seems like these incidents would damage China's reputation as a reliable partner and arms supplier.
Absolutely. When your flagship products are breaking down or failing to meet expectations, it undermines your credibility and makes other countries wary of doing business with you.
That makes sense. So we've got a lack of combat experience, questionable technology, and unreliable exports. Is that the full picture of China's naval challenges? Or is there more to the story?
Well, there's one more piece of the puzzle that we need to consider, and it takes us beyond just ships and technology and into the realm of geopolitics.
Okay, this is where things are going to get really interesting. Let's dive into that after a quick break. Just kidding, we're going to keep going. So stay with us as we explore the geopolitical dimension of China's naval ambitions.
We've been talking about the plan's limitations when it comes to ships and tech, but their strategic moves in the Indian Ocean region are raising eyebrows too.
You're talking about China's infamous debt trap diplomacy, right? I've heard that term thrown around, but I'm not entirely sure what it means in practice.
It's essentially a way for China to gain leverage over other countries by saddling them with unsustainable debt through infrastructure projects.
So they offer loans for these big, flashy projects,
Yeah.
knowing that some countries won't be able to pay them back. And then what?
Then China swoops in and demands concessions. Things like access to strategic ports, control over natural resources, or even political support for their agenda. It's a way for them to exert influence and expand their footprint without firing a shot.
That sounds pretty sneaky. Do you have a concrete example of how this has played out?
Look no further than Sri Lanka. China poured billions into building the Hambantota port, a massive project that many saw as a white elephant from the start.
A white elephant.
Something that's impressive in scale, but ultimately useless and a financial drain. Turns out, the port didn't generate nearly enough revenue for Sri Lanka to repay the loans. So guess what happened?
I'm guessing China stepped in and took control.
Bingo. They took over the port on a 99-year lease, giving them a strategic foothold right in the middle of a crucial shipping lane. And this pattern is repeating itself in other countries like Pakistan, with the Gwadar port.
So it's not just about building a powerful navy. It's about strategically positioning themselves throughout the Indian Ocean region using economic leverage.
Exactly. They're creating a network of ports and bases that could eventually allow them to challenge the dominance of other naval powers in the region.
So how are other countries responding to China's aggressive moves? Are they just sitting back and letting this happen?
Not at all. There's a growing awareness of the risks associated with China's debt trap diplomacy, and many countries are pushing back. You're seeing a shift in the way they approach their own naval strategies and partnerships.
What kind of shift are we talking about?
Well, for one, there's a greater emphasis on building partnerships based on shared values and a commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. The Quad nations, India, Japan, Australia, and the U.S. are a prime example of this.
Oh, yes. The Quad. We're hearing a lot about them these days. What's their strategy?
They're focusing on quality over quantity when it comes to naval power. They're pooling their resources to develop advanced technology, enhance interoperability, and conduct joint exercises that demonstrate their commitment to regional security.
So it's like a united front against China's more assertive approach.
You could say that. They're working together to create a counterbalance to China's growing influence and ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains open and accessible to all.
And what about India specifically? They're right in China's backyard, so to speak. What role are they playing?
India is emerging as a key player in this geopolitical chess game. They've been a leader in anti-piracy efforts, humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief in the Indian Ocean region. They're also actively participating in multilateral exercises with other navies, building trust and demonstrating their commitment to regional stability.
So they're taking a more collaborative and cooperative approach, as opposed to China's more transactional and often unilateral style.
Exactly. And it's resonating with other countries in the region who are wary of becoming too reliant on China.
Fascinating. So while China is busy building ships and flexing its economic muscle, other countries are quietly forging alliances and developing strategies to counter their ambitions.
That's a great way to put it. It's a dynamic situation, and it's
Right.
still too early to say how it will all play out.
We've talked a lot about China's ambitions in the Indian Ocean region. What about their global aspirations? Do they have plans to project power further afield?
They certainly have aspirations to become a global naval power, but their reach is limited by several factors. Logistically, it's very difficult for them to sustain operations far from home. They don't have the same network of bases and allies that the U.S. has, and their replenishment capabilities are still developing.
So even if they wanted to send their Navy halfway around the world, they might not have the logistical support to keep it running.
That's one of the major challenges they face. They've shown interest in expanding their presence in the Arctic and the Atlantic, but those are areas where the U.S. and European navies have a significant advantage in terms of experience, infrastructure, and global reach.
So to sum things up, China's Navy might be the biggest by ship count, but it's facing some serious headwinds when it comes to combat experience, technology, questionable export practices, and pushback from other countries who are forming their own alliances.
That's a pretty accurate assessment. It's important to remember that naval power is about more than just numbers. It's about a complex interplay of factors, including strategy, technology, partnerships, and the ability to project power effectively.
This has been incredibly insightful. I'm starting to understand just how complex this issue is. But before we wrap up, I want to ask you the million-dollar question. Is China's Navy a legitimate threat to the established naval powers?
That's a question with no easy answer. It's a question with no easy answer. On one hand, they've invested heavily in expanding their fleet and modernizing their capabilities. They're clearly determined to project power and challenge the existing order, particularly in the South and East China Seas.
So they're a force to be reckoned with,
Yeah.
especially in their own backyard.
Absolutely. But their lack of combat experience, their technological vulnerabilities, and their questionable export practices all raise serious doubts about their ability to truly compete with established naval powers on a global scale. And their aggressive use of debt diplomacy is creating a backlash that could further limit their influence.
So it's a
Yeah.
it's a mixed bag. They have the ambition and the resources, but they're also making some strategic missteps that are holding them back.
Exactly. It's a fascinating and complex situation that's still unfolding. The coming years will be crucial in determining whether China can overcome these challenges and become a truly credible global naval power.
It sounds like we'll have plenty to talk about in future episodes as this story continues to develop. But for now, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on.
I agree. It's a topic that deserves careful consideration, especially for those interested in geopolitics and international relations. And for anyone prepping for the UPSC exams, this kind of nuanced understanding of China's naval ambitions could be a real asset.
Couldn't agree more. So to wrap things up, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as they follow this story in the news?
I think the most important thing is to look beyond the headlines and the simplistic narratives. China's naval rise is a complex and multifaceted story, with both strengths and weaknesses. It's not just about the number of ships they have, but about how they use those ships, the quality of their technology, their strategic partnerships, and their overall approach to global power.
And it's about how other countries react to those ambitions, forming alliances, developing counter strategies, and shaping the future of the Indo-Pacific region.
Precisely. It's a dynamic and evolving situation that will have profound implications for the global balance of power in the coming decades.
Well said. This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the world of Chinese naval power. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you're a UPSC aspirant, best of luck with your exams. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.